Welcome to Cut the Crop, keeping you in the know about everything you grow. Researchers, growers and other interesting folk delivering insights and information on topics ranging from agronomy to profitability. Brought to you by the Foundation for Arable Research.
Hello and welcome. My name's Alison Stewart and I'm your host of this session of Cut the Crop. And today we have an international visitor with us, Connor Sible. Hi, Connor. Welcome.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
So Connor was the keynote speaker at our maize conference up in Hamilton. And I might pass over Connor and just give us a little bit of a background to who you are and what you do in America.
Yep. So I am what we call a postdoctoral research scientist. Fancy way that I like to summarize as professor in training. So I've completed all my graduate work and now I'm looking to be training towards a professor extension type position at a university, predominantly thinking in the US right now, but you never know what happens. And I work in field crop production, specifically maize and soybean, which I know is a little different to what I've learned here in New Zealand through my trip. Been a lot of things that have been really exciting to see and compare. And, just as much as things have been different, they've been quite similar at the same time. And so my job with the university is field research, management practices to improve maize yields. And then we take that information to our farmers to try and help them bring their field averages up. In a quick, short summary, kind of, that's the gist.
And you work with a very well-known senior maize international expert, Fred Below.
Yes.
And so that must be quite exciting because, he has got such a wealth of experience around maize and the 7 wonders of maize productivity. I think everybody who grows maize probably knows about that.
Yes, been extremely honored to have had the opportunity to work with Dr. Below now for 7 years. This May will be 7 full seasons, and still he's teaching me a lot. So he's just trying to be a sponge when you're working with him.
But your specialist area of interest is in the new biologicals that are coming along. And that's what you talked about at the maize conference. Just talk a little bit about what you're doing in that space at the moment.
Yep. So during my graduate studies and now into my postdoc, biologicals has been one of the key primary areas of my interest. We call it the Wild West of agriculture in the US because it just seems like there's a whole new frontier. But it's moving very fast, and it seems like the floodgates have opened. New products are coming to farmers every single week. It seems like they're dealing with a new sales rep that has the next best promising thing. And so what our work is trying to do is understand what exactly are these products. We hear from farmers, I used a biological, and then you push what one. And, often they can give you the trade name, but they maybe don't know exactly what that product is or what it does in the system. That's been a big education change for us, just educating our farmers. What are these products? How are they designed to work? And you have to start there if you want to have a chance of success. And that's where the research comes in. Understanding how different management practices come together to then add a biological concept into the system. One of the things we find the worst thing you can do is just let that sales rep give you a free sample and put it on any hectare that you would like. You really need to make sure, what's that product do? Do I need it? And if you need it, make sure it goes on the right land to get a chance of success.
Yeah, because let's just talk about the range of biological products that are out there, because obviously they can do a whole range of different things, and some individual products can do more than one thing. So just talk about the range.
Yep. Starting with biologicals, first 3 letters, bio, you hear that first 3 acronym in a lot of the descriptions for these products. And I'll separate it into 2 big groups, biopesticides and then bionutrition or biofertilizers. Very important to start there. One is pest management, one is nutrient management. And that's about all I'll say today on pest management because I'm on the nutrient side in my own research. So within the bionutrition space of biologicals, you have different things that target pretty well any nutrient, but largely focused on nitrogen and phosphorus, right? You think about nitrogen fixation in legume crops. We know about that. Why not nitrogen fixation for grass crops like maize or wheat? And that's the new frontier. It's not entirely that relationship we think of with legumes that's really natural, not the same in our cereal type systems. So can we make that work? So nitrogen fixation, phosphorus solubilization is the other side. There's so much phosphorus in our soils, but soils are tricky and they like to keep it to itself and it's not plant available. So can a microbial solution help release that phosphorus? And those would be what I would call living biologicals. So that's the number one thing, is those are a live microbe in that jug. And then there's commitment on the farm. If you buy a live product, you have to keep it alive all the way to point of application. And then the other side is the non-living side, often referred to as biostimulants, right? But there's that 3-letter acronym to start the term again. And that's like your stress mitigation, drought mitigation type products. Many farmers have heard of fulvic and humic acids or protein hydrolysate, alginate type things.
Yeah. And so, as you say, growers are being inundated with a plethora of products with claims of sometimes quite outrageous claims about what these products can deliver. And, the old saying, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. We've got to be really careful, though, that we don't dismiss, all these products because perhaps the marketing is a little bit exaggerated, because a lot of them do have a role to play and they can add value. It's just that we have to understand and have a realistic expectation of how to use them and when to use them and what they will deliver. From your experiences, and you're talking to growers in the US, how are you explaining to growers the best way to look at biologicals and decide how to put them into their system?
Yep, that's a lot of the same discussion that we are having. And I think the first thing that I always talk to growers with is, do you have your basics covered? And the marketing for these products tends to say it's a replacement for something on the farm, like a nutrient input. It can replace that synthetic fertilizer by using the microbe. But I tend to see the biologicals, we're having the best success when you've got all the groundwork set and you're asking, your local agronomist, what do I do next? That's when we can have the discussion to biologicals. And what we tend to see is it takes good, sound agronomic management and makes it better, rather than trying to replace things. So my number one recommendation for chance of success, have the basics covered, right? Seed selection, good nutrient management plan, good pest management plan. I'm a high yield scientist. I don't like pests. They take yield away. They don't add it. And so ensuring those are all covered. Then we talk about biologicals. And it really comes down to, don't just let a product be forced into your system. If you want to use a biological, that's great. Let's make sure we find the right tool for the job. And that's, I think, where the marketing maybe is a little different, where they kind of say it can replace certain management practices. But today's market, I should specify, it's a next step input. Really excited about what this could look like 5 to 10 years, because as you mentioned, some of these have these large, outrageous claims, but the biology pencils out. That's what gets exciting. If you look at the biology from sort of the textbook side, it makes sense. And then our job as an agronomist is to make that textbook work in the field, because that's a whole different scenario. But there's a reason to be excited about it. That's what I would say.
So just maybe just talk about some of the products that you've been testing, the nitrogen fixing products, and the kind of results that you've been getting. And then maybe talk about what opportunities there might be to be able to get those products into New Zealand.
Yep. So some of the more consistent successes, I'll start on the phosphorus solubilization as a starter. The idea of releasing mineral phosphorus from our soils so it's plant available. That's makes a lot of sense, like I said, because our soils are loaded in phosphorus. And so if we can just tap into that a little bit easier with something like a biological, it makes sense. And this is where I would challenge what we tend to find. You put the phosphorus solubilizing product with the fertilizer, and it tends to keep it available, preventing it from getting tied up. And if the fertilizer is still available, the plant can then use it. And so from that consistent recommendation, it's putting the product with the fertilizer rather than trying to replace the fertilizer itself. And these are some different bacillus type products, phosphorus solubilization. There's a wide range of what you could see on the active ingredient list. So it's a whole new understanding there. On the nitrogen fixation side, right? So I'll come back to that. That's probably what gets the most discussion going. I mean, if you think about it, for maize crops, cereal crops, they all need nitrogen, and we're really sourcing it from two spots. If it's not already in the soil, we're supplementing with fertilizer. 2 sources of nitrogen for our grass crops. That's all we have. If we could tap into the atmosphere and get a 3rd source of nitrogen, just thinking about where that could go gets me really excited on the research side. But what are we seeing today with commercial products? Back to your original question. And this kind of goes back to where I started. The idea of replacing nitrogen today, I just don't know if our microbial solutions are quite at that capacity. But what we have seen is when areas of the field let you down, right? So the soil did not mineralize enough or the fertilizer was lost, that 3rd source of inoculation N suddenly brings that nitrogen availability back up for the crop, and it keeps your field averages higher. I'll give you a great example. We had 14 different types of products in 2023 trials, and we didn't see any response across the board in our research. And is the conclusion that these products, do not work? You could conclude that, but we had a very big drought and severe potassium deficiency. And 2 things you need to move nitrogen into the plant are water and potassium. And so it's also understanding what other factors need to be there for that biological to be the next step in the system. So that's been a big learning curve for us. It's just to identify what are those factors that may limit the potential of a response for the product.
Yeah. But when those products are used in the right way and the environment's favorable, they can deliver, economic returns to the grower.
Yes, they can. And that's one of the marketing side, and I can't argue against this. The products themselves are relatively inexpensive when you compare it to inputs like seed, pesticides, and fertilizer. And so the average cost in the U.S. is anywhere from $10 to $20 an acre. And so that scales up times about 2.5, right, for your hectare reference. Pretty reasonable. You don't need a large response to pay back for that product. And like I said, at this point, now that you got the basics set, we are looking for just little gains at a time. They're not going to suddenly give you a 10 to 20% yield increase in our maize crops. Specialty crops, maybe different story. A lot of these products start there and then they go to the arable type crops. But
yeah, so we're really talking more around about the 4% increase.
Yes. Yeah. If somebody claims this product will increase your maize yields by 15%, I would challenge that. That's just not what I see in today's market.
Yeah. But across the acreages that you grow in the US, then that actually starts to turn out to be a reasonably good value proposition.
Exactly. It's all about economy of scale in that case. If you can cover the ground, the little bit adds up.
Yeah. So, obviously, there's a lot of product development work going on overseas, and the US is the key player. Are these products going to be able to be easily brought into New Zealand?
I wish I could sit here today and tell you yes, but there are some challenges that you face that we currently do not face in the US. The first one is the gene editing perspective. Some of these biologicals that I'm seeing come to market, right, it goes back to the microbes. We know them. We know what they do. So some scientists that are smarter than I am have found a way to tweak the microbes to do it even better. And that's where things, the biological product space, that's the growth. And that's why I say today's market, be a little cautious, but the future market could be something extraordinary. But in your situation, anything that's been edited, probably not in the near future and probably a long future away, maybe can see that come across your borders. So then we have to look at the biologicals that have not been edited, just naturally found. They do these processes. We cultured them, isolated them, and now have a product. And that comes down to also some restrictions I've learned here. You have a list of microbial species. And if that biological species is not on the list, you're going to have to either find it here to then get it added to the list or fight through some registration and regulation to convince that microbe has a place here. So that will be some hurdles here compared to where in the US, hundreds of products are on the market already.
Yeah. And that's an issue that we have across, a wide range of agricultural products, and the challenges of being able to bring them in. But the more products that are being developed overseas, the more likely there is that one or two of them will be able to come in.
Yep. And the exciting thing, like I said, when I kind of go back to our research, I've seen it work. I've seen the cases work and work. And there is a future market here. But it's just understanding we don't let the wagon get ahead of the horse, and that we truly understand, what it is you are going to apply and ensure we have everything set up to make that successful. That's really where it's going to start. And hopefully we can get our farmers ahead of that, give them a few tools so they're prepared for the market. So when that salesperson comes up, they're ready for it.
So, I mean, you've been in New Zealand and you've been at the conference and you've been out and visited a couple of farms and you're talking to research agencies. Is there anything that has surprised you about, things that you've seen in the maize industry in New Zealand?
Yep. So the biggest thing, just from a cultural practice perspective, like I kind of alluded to earlier, we have this little thing called soybean in the U.S., and we rotate every other year. And so we don't go maize following maize. And in our systems, because of that another thing, deep freeze in winter, we often fallow between our crops. Cover crops making a comeback in the U.S., but not nearly on the acres that we would expect to see. And so when I came down here, not only are you maize on maize from summer to summer, but then you're often putting some sort of cover, whether you're grazing it or baling it or just cover crop. And a lot of times I hear it's also like a ryegrass.
Yeah,
so grass on grass systems. That I think was the biggest surprise to me, just from a disease management perspective. Then again, I hear about your yields and I say, well, those are higher than our yields. And so clearly things are working. So, but as a yield scientist, there's always more, right? We know what the world records are, and we know that that's not the world average. And so there's always room for improvement.
Let's talk about that, because I think it's quite interesting, because I don't think a lot of people recognize there is still a huge opportunity, for yield improvements. So what are the world records? And then let's talk about the averages in the US and the averages in New Zealand.
Yep. So the recognized world record came out of the US. Actually, we just got a new one here in 2023 for maize. And that comes out to 624 bushels per acre, which I believe was somewhere around 39 ton on grain yield. That's one thing, kind of go back. We take pretty much everything to grain, not silage. Very different discussion there. Been learning about that quite a bit, but that's the record. 624 bushels per acre, which like I said, I think is 39 ton. And our U.S. average is about 175 bushels per acre. And the gap is the difference between those two. And, it's like 2.5 times the average. And what's, then farmers ask me, so what are those growers doing? How did you get that record maize grain yield? And there's a bunch of different things at play: soil type, environment, what are they putting in the season? But the one thing I like to remind farmers, it shows what can be achieved. And those farmers where the world records came from have access to the same seed that everyone else does. And that's where things get exciting. And sure, I don't think the average is going to suddenly become that high overnight, but it just shows if we can make a little bit improvement, how much room we do have to grow. So when I talk about world records, right, and people say, well, I'll never see that on the farm, I say, but it shows the potential, and they have the opportunity for that same seed.
And that comes back to, Fred Below's discussions around, the 7 wonders of maize production. And he's sort of apportioned out the importance of the different components and what's driving yield. And, we're trying to make sure that our research that we do in FAR is trying to address the key drivers of that productivity. So have you noticed anything that is something that you will take back to the US and say, oh gosh, it's something that I think that might be worthwhile us trying?
Yes. So working with some of the projects that FAR is doing, some of the split planter covers, and just changing what goes in the inner rows between the row that you're going to put the maize into, the annual rye in the middle, and then put the clover every 4th row on the drill type approach. I think it may have been done in the US a long time ago, but I was just like, I haven't seen that, at least not in Illinois systems. So that got me excited. The silage market is interesting. And so there's a lot of influence there that I'll have to wrap my head around, because a lot of the data and research we do, we see a vegetative biomass response to biologicals and other practices. And then the grain yields come back the same as our check plots. And then you scratch your head and think, what happened between that VTR1 biomass we measured to grain yield? But, I flip that on, well, if you're going to silage, that's fine, vegetative, because you're not going all the way through to black layer. But those types of systems, the constant cover, that I think is something we have a lot of room to improve upon in the U.S. Yeah. We do too much. We do a lot of fallow, and there's a place for tillage and such. But I think that there's areas where doing that type of work, we could maybe bring it a little more on the conservation side.
Yeah. And so conversely, are there things that you do in the US that you think that we really should be looking at?
Yep. So in maize production, we see it year over year, narrowing the row. I understand that's equipment change and investment change. And on the silage side, it's the same machine, but doesn't quite feed right. But we see every time a yield response to just narrowing the row. And then when you narrow the row, you can increase the density, the number of plants that you're putting per area, and you can get more yield out of it that way. I had some discussions here and I said, has anyone tried the narrow rows? And they said they did. And then I followed it up with, did they change the planting density? And they said they did not, and they saw no advantage. One of the advantages to narrowing the row is you can plant more plants. So that's one thing. Understanding, though, as a researcher, easy to say that. And then somebody puts the equipment bill in front of me and says, are you going to pay for that? Understand those challenges and hurdles are there from that perspective. And then in-season nutrient management. We do a lot of liquid in the U.S. Here it's mostly dry. Liquid offers opportunity for us to get into the field and supplement fertility as the crop grows. And we're really taking a new approach in our research, fertilize the plant, not the soil, and fertilize the plant for peak rate of uptake, right? So when that maize plant goes from V8 to VTR1, very fast, that's the fastest rate of growth. It's also the time it needs the most nutrients per day. So in-season nutrient management with different types beyond just your early season side dress. Those are things that I think could also improve the maize yields.
Oh, excellent. I was going to ask you, did you want to come back?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we would love to have you. So thank you very much, Connor. I mean, your talk at the Maize Conference was definitely the highlight of the conference, and we had lots of good feedback. And I'm sure that people will listen to this podcast. And if anyone wants to see your presentation, then obviously it will be going up on the FAR website. So thank you, and safe travels back to the US.
Thank you for having me. Like I said, it's just been a dream trip learning all about the different systems here. And like I said, I think it's exciting when you get that opportunity because you see what's different, but at the same time, you see how much we really are the same in the systems. And so that makes the knowledge universal, and it's been a great time. So
excellent.
Really thank you.
Great. And thank you, listeners. Have a great time on the farm.
Thanks for tuning in to Cut the Crop, presented to you by FAR. If you'd like to know more about any of the topics discussed or have any suggestions for future topics, go to www.cutthecrop.co.nz.